Alan Wake is a surreal third-person shooter where you use the light to fight off the dark presence corrupting the people in a small town. The game was developed by Remedy, known for Max Payne and Control. You play as Alan Wake, a famous writer on a vacation with his wife in Bright Falls, a small town in Washington, when things take a strange turn and everything gets consumed by darkness. Your wife disappears, and now Alan Wake is on his quest to find out what's happening and who or what took his wife. You can definitely tell this game is an Xbox 360 game. It doesn't look that bad fidelity-wise, but it's not that good either. That's where art direction comes in. The way the game uses light and darkness are really interesting to look at. Areas corrupted by darkness will have a really eerie black fog that wraps around the forest and leads to a very interesting effect. It definitely makes you feel uneasy and puts you on your toes. The way the darkness wraps around enemies as well gives them a really weird blurry effect, which makes it very unworldly and uncomfortable, but in a good way. The fog that wraps around enemies really makes it hard to tell what features they have, so you're not always 100% sure what you're looking at. The game also has really good feedback when removing the darkness around Taken, with a big burst of light and no more eerie fog around them, so you can make out what they are and not feel as threatened by the unknown. It's also really cool how they show you information with lights in the game, like the lens flare halo thing that appears around an enemy to show how much more you need to shine a light on them, or the flashlight dimming to know when you need to charge your battery. Flares are also really neat because they give off so much light and it really makes you feel powerful and safe. Your flashlight also works as your aiming reticle, and it's very clear to see where you're looking. It's always piercing through all that black fog, so you never lose what you're looking at. It's nice to see more immersive UI elements like this. I love those in games. Sound and feedback for killing the Taken is very satisfying. When they die, they explode into a bright light, slowly disintegrating, and it's just really satisfying to hear and look at. The sound is so crisp, and it's just really nice. Guns are good to alright, a lot of them don't stand out, but the flare gun and the over-under I really like. Fog and lighting really carry the environments to stick out and look interesting. Usually you're just going through some pretty mundane places, but they all have a strange ambience. You'll mainly be spending your time in the woods, but you'll go through some other areas like farms, town streets, a lumber yard, or a dam. But overall, nothing too out of the ordinary. Voice acting is pretty good, all of the cast does a really good job. The standouts for me are definitely Alan and Barry. I really like the way they work together, and you can tell how long they've known each other and how much they care about one another. It's really well done, they have a really good chemistry. The game also has a few episodes of a live-action show just in the universe. It's called Night Springs. It's a reference to the Twilight Zone. They're usually only like a couple minutes long, but they were a treat any time I found them. They were really fun. Gameplay, as with everything else in this game, revolves around light and darkness. You shine your light on the Taken to weaken them and open them up to taking damage. Your main weapon will be a 6-shot revolver. The game also has shotguns, rifles, flares, flare guns, and flashbangs. None of the weapons in the game have an external magazine, so you'll mainly be loading your weapons one at a time. You can speed up reloading by mashing the reload button. I like this mechanic because if you run out of ammo in a tense fight, mashing reload actually does something and it can make it feel more intense. Your flashlight also has a battery that you need to keep track of. The flashlight's power will come back automatically over time, but focusing your flashlight to really get rid of the darkness will take a lot of power from it, so you will need to change the batteries in tense fights. Your flashlight will always be on unless you completely run out, but since it comes back, it's fine. The main reason it's always on is because it's your aiming reticle. It will also slowly, very, very slowly remove darkness if you're just aiming on them, but focusing is always better. While you're playing through the game, you'll find bigger and better flashlights like a handheld floodlight and like a heavy-duty flashlight, but they all act the same. The game is split up into 6 episodes, with each getting rid of all of your weapons and whatever flashlight you have. Usually it will throw you into a new episode with a normal flashlight and a revolver, your fundamentals. Missions are linear, but they do have some little side paths for loot and collectibles. One reoccurring thing that you can find are these yellow arrows that only show up in the light. They usually lead you to a box of goodies that will have ammo, batteries, and such. Sometimes they'll have like a shotgun or a rifle sitting next to it, or like a flare gun in it, but they're always useful, so keep an eye out for them. Throughout each level you'll find lampposts. They act as checkpoints and a place to get your health back. The game also has some pretty fun levels. All of them were pretty much hits for me. One of them has you fighting a bunch of taken and possessed cars in a demolition derby arena. Another one has you fighting off waves of taken on a stage with a bunch of pyrotechnics and lights, which is just really fun. But overall, I really liked all the missions. The game has a couple different types of taken. There's the little grunt guys with knives. They move pretty fast and they try to get in your blind spots, but they're really squishy, so I usually deal with them first. The most common taken are pretty much what you'd expect. They take about 3 shots from the revolver, move at a decent pace, and are able to throw their weapons at you if you stray too far. These are the bulk of what you'll be fighting. The Taken also have these big, heavy guys that usually have sledgehammers or axes. These guys move really slow and have a lot of health, but they pack a punch with every hit. The Taken also have some more special units, like these super fast guys, like they're almost teleporting, that take a while to get the darkness to come off. Or the chainsaw guys, which are just really tanky. You'll also have to deal with flocks of birds, which can be taken out just by using light, such as flashlights, flares, and flashbangs, though the best is probably the flare gun. The last enemy is poltergeists, which can also only be taken out with light. These come in a few forms. They can be any of like a floating object or a prop. They can also take over cars and construction vehicles and gates to block your path. The game is pretty stable. I only ran into one aiming glitch, and it happened to me a decent amount of times for it to stick out. The game would think you're aiming and move you really slow, and you would be stuck like this unless you aimed and fired a shot, which sucked. But beside that, the game ran pretty well with no glitches or crashes. The game also has a few collectibles. It has these thermoses, which I really didn't go out of my way to look for. There's like 100 of them, so I was just like, whatever. I don't think they add or give you anything. But the pages you'll find I did really like. I would go out of my way to look for these. They're fun to listen to and will usually tell you what's going to happen in the future of the game's story. It was really interesting to read and listen because maybe you would say a character dies or something, and then a couple minutes later you'll find that character dead in the exact same way. I really liked it, and it was really fun. They're also all voice acted, so if you don't like reading them, you can just listen to Alan Wake read them to you. If you want to avoid spoilers, skip to here. The game starts off with Wake and his wife going on a little vacation to a small town in Washington named Bright Falls. On their way to Bright Falls, they meet a local radio host who would love to do an interview with Wake, but he's trying to keep his presence on the down low while he's here. Wake stops by a small diner to grab the key to the cabin that him and his wife are staying at. He meets some locals, like the waitress, who is a mega fan of Wake, and tries to hit on him. There are also some local musicians sitting in one of the booths that just escaped a quote-unquote wellness center. You also meet a strange woman holding a lamp who is obviously very cautious of the dark and tells Alan to be careful. As you go to get the key, a woman shrouded in darkness hands Wake the key and gives him directions. She says she'll come by later and see how Wake and his wife are settling in, then vanishes. As they're leaving, a mechanic comes out and says Alice forgot her keys, but neither Wake or Alice hears him and keep going. Once they get to the cabin, Alice reveals to Wake that she brought him here to help with his writer's block, and asked him to write. Alan gets upset and storms off to take a breather outside. The power goes out and you hear Alice screaming. Wake runs back to the cabin to see what happens and finds a broken railing overlooking the lake. So he jumps in to save her, and everything goes black. Alan then wakes up in a crashed car with no knowledge of how or why he's there. He makes a plan to go to a nearby gas station to use a phone to ask for help. On his way, he finds a couple of pages with the title of Departure, written by Alan Wake. He planned his next book to have the exact same name, but he hasn't written any of it yet, which makes it kinda strange. Wake makes his way through an abandoned lumber yard, fighting off some shadowy figures known as the Taken. Once he gets to the gas station, Alan finds it to be completely empty and calls the police. He tells them that he's been in a bad crash and lost his wife. Wake tells the sheriff that him and his wife were staying on a cabin on an island in Cauldron Lake, but the cop says there hasn't been an island there since the big eruption in the 70s. 3 years ago in New York during a heavy storm, Alan gets home with some groceries and Alice is in the next room processing the photos she took of him for a magazine. As Alan goes to grab a cup of coffee, all the power goes out, and that's where we learn Alice is deathly afraid of the dark. Wake lights a bunch of candles and they both sit on a couch. Alan tells her a story of when he was a little kid, that he was really scared of the dark, so his mom gave him an old light switch that she called the clicker. She said if he flipped the light switch, it would make a magic light come on and scare all the monsters away. We flash forward to the present where Alan wakes up in a doctor's office with somebody tending to his wounds. The sheriff starts asking Wake some questions when he gets a call on his phone. It's from an unknown caller, and after picking it up, Wake hears his wife Alice screaming for help. The kidnapper gives Alan instructions on where to meet him and to stop talking to the police if he ever wants to see Alice again. He tells Alan to meet him on Lover's Peak. As Wake is leaving the sheriff's station, an owner of a local wellness center for artists tells Alan that he invited Alice here because he thought it could help Mr. Wake. Wake punches him in the face, just as his good friend and agent Barry comes in worried sick about Wake. Wake and Barry take a drive while Alan explains everything to him. They stop by a ranger station to ask the whereabouts of Lover's Peak, and get a cabin to stay at. Later that night, Wake leaves the cabin, and fights through waves of Taken to get to Lover's Peak. Alan eventually comes across a gondola, and while riding it, the gondola crashes and Alan loses all of his gear, but the kidnapper saves him from a group of Taken, and gets introduced to flares. Wake follows the kidnapper, protecting him from the Taken using the flares while the kidnapper shoots them, and after getting to a resting spot, Wake and the kidnapper talk. The kidnapper wants the entire manuscript for departure that Wake wrote, but Wake hasn't been writing it. He's only been finding the scattered pages. The kidnapper says if you can't get him the manuscript, he'll hurt Alice or possibly even kill her. So in a fit of rage, Alan punches him in the face and breaks through a railing. They both fall and get separated. Alan needs to make his way back to Barry, so he steals a car and drives it back to the cabin to find it surrounded by crows. After fighting them off, Wake makes his way inside, and Barry now believes all the things Wake said. Later on in the morning, the girl from the diner calls and says she has the rest of the pages for Wake's manuscript, so they plan to meet up with her the next day. Alan and Barry make their way to the sparkling river estates to meet with the waitress from earlier. Once they get there, the waitress seems a little strange and offers them both some coffee. Wake and Barry soon find out that the coffee is drug, and they both pass out. Wake has a dream where a strange voice tells him that
"It's coming for you, hiding in my barber's skin. I'm too weak to stop it. You must turn the lights on."
Alan wakes up and frantically opens the blinds to find that it's nighttime. Wake tries to leave and find Barry, but is stopped by the manager and the cops. An agent of the FBI named Nightingale stops Wake, but calls him Hemingway. Wake runs for the woods and gets chased by the fuzz. While Wake is running away, you see cops searching for him but being taken out by the darkness. After escaping the chase, Alan makes his way towards the radio station. He thinks the host he met on the ferry might be able to help him. The cops, however, meet up with Wake at the radio station, and Nightingale just starts firing at Wake. After escaping again, Wake heads to the train depot to find a car and ends up fighting a possessed bulldozer. Wake defeats the dozer and finds a car. Alan is planning to meet the kidnapper at an abandoned coal mine, and he doesn't have all the pages, but he's really desperate, so he'll try to bargain with the little he has. Wake waits for the kidnapper to arrive, but he's a no-show. At night, he calls Wake to meet him at a different spot, a mountain that's not too far from the coal mine. Wake fights through ghost towns, abandoned mines, and forest, and he eventually rendezvous with the kidnapper. When he gets there, he hears the kidnapper talking to somebody, begging for mercy. He says that he doesn't have Alice, and he never did. Once Wake confronts him, a giant black tornado sweeps the kidnapper up, also grabbing Wake. Alan uses a flare to get out of the darkness's grasp, and falls into the lake, going unconscious. Alan wakes up to be greeted by Dr. Hartman, which is the owner of the wellness center. Hartman says that Wake has gone through another rough period and has been a patient at his clinic for some time now. Hartman says the shock from Alice's death has triggered a mental illness in Wake. After Wake comes to his senses, he notices Hartman has drugged him with something, but Hartman and Wake take a walk around the location. Alan meets some of the patients at the clinic, alongside two familiar faces, the brothers Tor and Odin. They were the two old men at the diner. Hartman leaves Wake with the two brothers and insists Wake write more. The brothers talk about how Hartman is trying to fish out their secrets, but he's not crazy enough. The brothers tell Wake that he should go to their farm, and Odin hands Alan a page. Once Wake returns to his room, he hears the two Anderson brothers causing a ruckus and a giant storm outside. Tor knocked out a nurse at the clinic and trapped the security in the staff room. Wake takes the keys from the nurse and heads to Dr. Hartman's office. He finds Barry locked in a room right in front of his office. After Wake gets into his office, he finds the manuscript pages, his gun, and a flashlight on Hartman's desk. Hartman tries to convince Wake that together they can make something amazing, but Wake locks Hartman in his office with the darkness. After escaping the clinic's building, Alan needs to make his way through the garden and the hedge maze to meet up with Barry in the car. Once he's through all that, they leave to go to the Anderson brother farm, and Barry and Alan once again crash due to a mysterious rock slide. After finding each other, they agree to make their way to the farm, but Barry and Wake are separated. Once Wake gets to the farm, he's greeted by a giant stage for the band Old Gods of Asgard, the band the two brothers formed. The stage is outfitted with tons of lights and pyrotechnics, so Barry mans the lights in effect while Alan plays the frontman fighting off hordes of Taken. After that, Wake and Barry make their way through the farm to get to the house on the property. When they get there, they play a record telling them to find the Lady of Light to reshape destiny. Wake and Barry decide to settle down and get wasted to kind of take their mind off of all the stuff they've been going through. Wake has a dream about the night he lost Alice to the lake. He meets the grim woman we saw earlier at the diner, and she says to Wake that he can get his wife back, he just needs to write it into reality. Wake gets stuck writing pages of Departure, those manuscript pages that you've been finding throughout the game. The woman is using Wake to restore her power to take over Bright Falls, but Wake wrote Zane into the story to come and save Wake. Zane was a writer in Bright Falls, and Barbara, who is now the Grim Woman, was his wife. She wanted to use the power of the lake and died trying to exploit it. After saving Alan, Zane gets caught by Barbara, and Alan wakes up and is caught by Agent Nightingale. Alan and Barry wake up in a jail cell. The sheriff and Nightingale walk in to ask them some questions, and Alan starts having a vision of Alice and Cauldron Lake. Nightingale dismisses this just to be another one of Alan's tricks, but the sheriff has had enough of Nightingale, so she sides with Wake. Nightingale holds everyone at gunpoint right before he gets snatched by the darkness. The sheriff agrees to help Wake get to Cynthia Weaver, the Lady of Light, at the old power plant. The sheriff tells Barry to make a bunch of calls to the people of Bright Falls and say the code word Night Springs, while Wake and the sheriff get to a helicopter. Once they all meet up, they make their way to the old power plant, but while they're letting down Wake, the chopper gets attacked by a bunch of Taken crows. After fighting through the Taken, Wake meets up with the Lady of Light, and she says that she's been waiting for him a very long time. She tells Wake that they need to get to the well-lit room, and to do so, he needs to redirect the power into the pipes to reach it. While going through the pipes, Wake calls his friends to tell him to meet him at the dam, but while on the phone, they crash. Alan leaves the pipes to go help them, and tells the Lady of Light he'll meet her there. Once Wake meets up with Barry and the Sheriff Sarah, they fight through hordes, making progress to the top of the dam, but Wake gets cut off from the rest of the group, and makes it to the top on his own. Once he gets to the top of the dam, the Dark Presence chases him across the whole thing, until his friends open an elevator for him, and he escapes. Once Wake and his crew make it to the well-lit room, Wake finds a page explaining the story of the clicker when he was a kid, and he looks inside the box on the table to find the clicker. We once again cut to a flashback 2 years ago in New York. Alan is waking up from a hangover and watches himself on a talk show talking about his latest book. Wake talks to Alice about the stress his tour has put on him and tells Alice that they should go on a vacation. Cut back to the present day, and Wake determines that the clicker is the key to Cauldron Lake, and Wake needs to get back to the typewriter and type out the final page. Wake fights through endless hordes of Taken until he eventually arrives at Cauldron Lake. Face to face with a tornado of darkness, Wake fires flares into the tornado, destroying it, and Wake jumps into the lake with the clicker. He wakes up in a dreamlike version of his old home in New York. Alice is there and said that Wake had a bad dream and all the power is out. Once Wake finds the clicker and uses it, he ends up in the lake with Thomas Zane and a kind of evil version of himself, Mr. Scratch. Wake finds his way through Cauldron Lake and comes to the cabin where it all began. Wake shoves the clicker inside Barbara and kills her with a light, and Alan writes Alice to safety and stays in Cauldron Lake, closing with these words.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
Alice.
Overall, the game has a pretty fun story that can really mess with your perception of reality. It's really fun to kind of slowly piece together what's actually happening. I think the game is written well, but I wish Wake didn't get knocked out like every other chapter, but otherwise, it's a pretty engaging story. The game also has 2 bonus missions which focus more on some of the mechanics from the last mission in the game, having you shine your lights on words to summon things like ammo, enemies, explosive barrels, and more. I wish the base game had more of these mechanics because they were really fun, and honestly, both of the bonus missions are probably my favorites. Alan Wake is a really fun game with some mediocre shooting but a really fun story. It has a pretty unique way of using light, not just in storytelling but also in gameplay. If you're a fan of other linear third-person shooting games with a focus on story, I 100% recommend. American Nightmare follows Alan Wake in an episode of Night Springs, being twisted by Alan Wake's evil twin, Mr. Scratch, and the darkness. Wake has to fight his way through the Taken to find out why he's trapped in Night Springs. The game's fidelity is maybe a little bit better than Alan Wake, but not by much. I feel like the lighting is a little more flat and doesn't really have that nice contrast of light and dark that the first game has. Environments are more varied with a science lab, a motel, and a drive-in movie theater. Enemy designs are a little bit more characterized as well, like the Crow Taken guys and the giant dudes, but more or less it's the same. Sound effects and voice acting are pretty much on par with Alan Wake 1. The game does have some live-action cutscenes, which I really liked, and more live-action TV bits with Mr. Scratch kind of egging you on. The game definitely feels different artistically and tonally. It's a little more tame, though the game does still have some dark themes, mainly from Mr. Scratch. Gameplay is also pretty similar to the first game, mainly it just adds more guns and new enemies. You can get the new weapons by finding the manuscript pages to unlock chests. The maps are also semi-open, it's not like there are other quests or anything, but you can find the pages and the chests. American Nightmare also has a wave survival mode if you're into that. I didn't play it much, but overall nothing too different. Want to avoid spoilers, skip to here. The game starts with Barry asleep while a TV is playing an episode of Night Springs. It shows Alan Wake in a black fog looking for something before being attacked by Mr. Scratch and waking up in the middle of nowhere. He runs by an oil tower taken over by the darkness and escapes to a little motel. He finds a girl named Emma in the garage and asks for help with destroying the Taken. Wake needs to find 3 items to destroy the tower: a wheel, a CD, and a battery. Alan finds this out by finding a manuscript page, and Emma ends up dying to the Taken, and Wake finds a key to a motel room. In the room, he finds a dead guy that works at a local observatory. Wake goes to the observatory and needs to get a signal from a satellite. With the help of an observatory worker, he gets the message, but only part of it. We also learn that Mr. Scratch is looking for the same message, and has been there before Wake. Next, he heads to a drive-in, and he needs to restore the power to the whole place. So he goes to a nearby power plant and turns the power back on. After fighting a bunch of Taken, he goes to the projection booth and does what the message says, but since he doesn't have the full thing, it fails, sending him back to the beginning. Wake goes through it all again, but all of the people he's met remembers him and help him right off the bat. Wake gets the second piece of the message, but it's still not enough, and after going through it a third time, and final time, Wake defeats Scratch with a movie Alice made of her and Wake, and Scratch gets destroyed by the light, ending on a happy ending, kind of. Alan Wake is a great game, and American Nightmare is an okay one. If you can get both in a bundle, I would recommend both. American Nightmare I beat in one sitting that was probably about 3 to 4 hours, and Alan Wake, with the bonus missions, was about 13. I really like the world they've set up for Alan Wake, and the storytelling is really fun. I've heard Alan Wake 2 is fantastic, but sadly I can't run it that well, though I have played some of it, and I like it more than the original and American Nightmare. Next time, be prepared for something a little bit more dwarf-having and elf-loving.